All right, everybody. Good afternoon. I always try to start on time. I hate it when I get to church and the pastor starts late because everybody else is coming in late. I'm like, I was here on time. So I'm trying to reward y'all. I'm really grateful to the ISS committee for having me here this afternoon and grateful for all of you. It's an absolutely gorgeous day out there. And oh, it's pouring rain and snowing. But I'm just really grateful for y'all to be here today. My name is Lisa Kenyon. I'm at Grand Valley State University in West Michigan. We had not only snow just very recently, we're having snow again on Monday, and I am loving wearing the sundress here. I also found this winter we usually get a lot of snow. I mean, we live in West Michigan, but we had about 40 inches more snow at last count than we typically do. So about 120 inches or so. That's a lot of snow. So I was ready for wearing a sundress. So thank you very much. All right. I'm going to be talking today about stand up for participation. There'll be another session during this conference that also has stand up for participation as its title. We did not collaborate on titles, although it kind of looks like we did. But really what we're looking at today is integrating how use of power wheelchair standing devices into daily routines and daily life activities for children. Is the mic okay? Yeah, it is. Okay. Sounds a little odd to me, but it might just because I'm so close. All right. Do you want to disclose that I have conducted 2 research studies where Promobile has loaned equipment to my university under an equipment loan agreement. We have our objectives today, looking at potential ways that power wheelchair standing devices can enable children's engagement and activities and participation in life situations, looking at the 5 steps that we developed for stand up to participate, and then applying these concepts to a case that I think we're going to end up walking through together. I don't know how many of you were at Jean Minkel's session this morning where we tried to do a small group activity, and I was like, ooh, that didn't go very well. And I looked at the size of this room, and I was like, there's the potential to have a lot of people. So before I gave my stuff to Thomas, I changed up a few things. I think we'll just walk through that together. Okay. So one of the things that I wanted to try to address first of all is what I mean by a power wheelchair standing device. Because there are many different devices out there, and I know that there's many different terms used for these devices. We have chosen to go with the term power wheelchair standing device that's coined by a group in Australia, trying to get some consistency within the literature. And this in particular means that the power wheelchair converts between sitting and standing and can be driven in either position. And that's not the case for all standing power wheelchairs. And so throughout the session here and tomorrow when you see me, we'll be using the power wheelchair standing devices. Many different brands on the market. Here in the US, we have stuff from Levo, we have stuff from Promobile, and we have stuff from Sunrise. I noticed a couple of new ones down the stairs. Really exciting to see things growing and developing within this field. I got into power wheelchair standing devices. I almost called them the wrong thing right off the bat. I got into power wheelchair standing devices, gosh, at the first OSS. Anybody at the first Oceanicity? I thought you were there, Lenore. And at that OSS, I had presented along with my mentor, Bill Miller, a session on using single subject research design to try to enhance evidence-based practice. And Deb Wilson from Seating to Go in New Zealand and her therapist approached Bill and I about helping them design something to look at the impact of power wheelchair standing devices. And so, you know, those of you who know me know that I usually work with kids in power devices or manual devices, providing skills training but often I work with children who are considered to be not your typical candidates for things. So this wasn't something that was necessarily something I was thinking about, because in our area in West Michigan at the time, I only knew of 2 kids who had them in the whole west side of the lake. So we found that there surprisingly was very little in the literature. And so we went on to conduct a qualitative study just to inform our selves about what were some of the possibilities. What could we measure in a single subject research design? And I did present this at the ISS last year when it was on Zoom. And I thought I'd take the opportunity to just run through it a little bit, because it does help to show the mindset of the progression of what I'm going to talk about. And cute kids, cute pictures, how can you go wrong? Okay. So we identified 3 themes in the data. We talked to different types of stakeholders. We talked to parents of children who used a power wheelchair standing device. We talked to children who used a power wheelchair standing device. We talked to therapists who either felt very strongly for them or very strongly against them. And we even talked to a couple manufacturers and engineers who work in manufacturing companies to get a more full view of the devices. So we identified 3 different themes. We identified stand on demand, which was the idea that the power wheelchair standing device gave the children the ability to stand wherever and whenever they wanted to without having to transfer into another device. And then we also learned about that idea that it's more than weight bearing. It really changed how people perceive children and their abilities, gave children options to do things that maybe they hadn't been able to do before. And then finally, we identified some ecosystems that could be barriers potentially to the procurement and use of power wheelchair standing devices. And I love hearing the voices of the children. So I wanted to share with you a few quotes from our children. So one of the children, a 10-year-old boy with cerebral palsy, says, "I like to stand at church when all the rest of the people are standing. It makes me feel like I really belong." Okay. And then under it's more than weight bearing, one of the teenagers, young lady with cerebral palsy said, "In my power wheelchair standing device, people can look at me in the eye. And as little as that may seem, one of the main things in our society is eye contact. And not having eye contact is a constant barrier if I'm sitting down." She also talked about how it allowed her to not miss school time, because prior to getting a power wheelchair standing device, she was being transferred in and out of her power wheelchair into a stander, which took away from her academics. And she's in an honors program at her high school and wants to be a surgeon. You got to think that we've got to prioritize her academics if that's the case. Another father said that people assume a kid in a power wheelchair has cognitive difficulties, but they see my son standing in his power wheelchair standing device, looking at them face to face, and that assumption is diminished. A lot of our qualitative work in power wheelchairs has shown that people do view children differently when they're using a power wheelchair. And here's just additional layers onto that we found in this one. We found that the children and other stakeholders view this power wheelchair standing devices as allowing children to engage in activities, washing hands, which became a huge benefit during COVID, reaching for objects like getting a snack or a glass of water, toileting for boys who are able to actually use the toilet by themselves, participating in life situations, performing in a play, singing in a choir, playing with friends, working at a grocery store, partaking in chem lab, doing chores at home, in the yard, standing at a high top table in a restaurant. These are all things that our participants, our children in particular, identified. But we also identified some issues with ecosystems influencing power wheelchair standing device acquisition and use. And one of these was as expressed by a 14-year-old boy, "I can't fit my power wheelchair standing device everywhere around the house or at school. So that's kind of a problem. I mean, if I could fit the power wheelchair standing device in these areas, then I probably would use the power wheelchair standing device, but we just can't. So I can't get into the bathroom, and it's a squeeze to get in the kitchen, and I can't use the power wheelchair standing device much at school. And this kind of caught my interest about things. And, after the formal interview was over, I asked the child and his mom a few questions. Um, and one of the things that they were identifying as being like physical or architectural barriers were some things that maybe could have been addressed by some changes in how furniture was laid out. Changes, and instead of always going from the bathroom on down one hallway, you could come in it from the other. Yeah, it took you half a second longer, but there might be some other ways. And so that kind of stuck into my mind as we went further into our exploratory study involving pediatric power wheelchair standing devices. Details would be provided about that tomorrow. I had hoped that they would be in a different order, but today we're going to talk about some of the things that we learned out of that study. And one of the things we did one of the reasons we did the exploratory study for was we wanted to move forward the evidence for children, particularly children who have conditions other than Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. The limited research that's out there is of low evidence, but a lot of it involves boys with Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. Just recently, two articles are been accepted in press related to children with other conditions. One was an interrupted time series by Deb Field, and one was by Jacob Golke and I looking at a case series. So again, a little lower evidence. But one of the things we identified, surprise, surprise, in our study was that these environmental factors may impact these children's uses. And children and parents often needed support in identifying that is issues that could sometimes be easily problem solved, right? And so moving forward, I really wanted to look at this. And then I also found that for a lot of our kids, and I think this might be where there's a difference between boys who have Duchenne's muscular dystrophy and my children with cerebral palsy or spinal cord injury, some of which who'd never ever stood on their own before. They really seem to have difficulties with that idea. Oh, I can stand up and get that. I can stand up and look at that. I can do this. So kind of representing that paradigm shift and feeling that we needed to have a more specific intervention in our future upcoming study, looking at helping the child and the family learn how to use the power wheelchair standing device and all of its features, and how to better integrate it into their daily lives. But I thought that we really needed to look at both things together, because for all of the children in our existing study, both of these things were a problem. So when I thought about children and parents often needing support to problem solve out things in the environment and potential environmental constraints, I thought about work by Mary Law and Annabie. I do not know Annabie's first name, where they used some approaches to go ahead and try to ameliorate these environmental constraints. And it's really important to think about that influence of the environment, because we know that for our children, the environmental factors significantly influence their participation at home, school, and in the community. And if we think about the different aspects of the environment that could be a support or a barrier, you have the physical environment. And I think as a PT, I tend to go right to this one, right? But we could also think about the social environment, social support, peer support, attitudinal environment. There's as we get to the case, there's a little bit of an attitudinal aspect there. And then the familial environment, the family functioning. And all of these, as well as institutional policies, can really influence how somebody can use any assistive technology, right? This is not a unique problem to power wheelchair standing devices, but I think it really came out to me more because the children were going in more environments than they typically had, and we're identifying different issues. So another thing that I found really interesting in a 2013 study by Bedell, 36% of parents of children with disabilities reported no access to or availability of programs and services. And they also surveyed parents of typically developing children at the same time in the same region, and only 3% of those with typically developing children like that. So there's also this gap in our parents maybe being aware of, or in some areas, maybe programs for children. We're really fortunate. We have a really strong therapeutic rec program at Mary Free Bed Rehabilitation Hospital in Grand Rapids. And they do all sorts of fun things. They take the kids water skiing, snow skiing. It's nice when you live on a lake and have a mountain nearby. You can do all these things. They do rock climbing. They do kayaking. They do all these things. But I can't tell you how many parents I meet that have no idea that that exists. And the cost is either very minimal, or you can apply for aid to have that covered. And so those are things that can kind of contribute to what a child feels like they're able to do. And barriers to participation may increase if parents aren't able to access these types of things or are unfamiliar with policies. We talked in an earlier session about families aren't always familiar with what their rights are and their children's rights are in a school setting. Well, if you want to change how the classroom is laid out, you need to be aware of your rights to ask for that. And maybe a little coaching to how to approach that, because in my experience, it works a lot better if I go in and I'm like, hey, I wonder, rather than going, fix it, you know. Okay. But again, that influence of the environment is really important, because what we want to do is have our children participating to the maximum. I love this. This is one of my favorite young men. I've worked with him since he was 2, and he's now 15. I have not aged a day. But he's required to do chores, and he complains about it just like any other teenager. Oh, chores. And I love that. Just love that. So when I thought about this idea of the environment, I got to thinking about that work by Mary Law and by Anime, using a program called Pathways and Resources for Engagement and Participation, or PrEP for short. And it's a program directed to occupational therapists, but I contacted Mary Law. Those of you who know me know I don't hesitate to contact anybody. She said, oh yeah, you physical therapists can use that too. Okay. And I think it's just got some wonderful aspects about parent coaching and identification of environmental and not just physical barriers that have been really helpful for me. And I wasn't actually going to include this in the presentation when I first started to prepare the abstract. And I mentioned to a couple of my OT colleagues that, well, I use this, but probably everybody knows about it. They were like, what's the PrEP? So I thought that I would mention it in hopes to get some engagement with the PrEP. Oh, okay, I'm tired by this time of day. And so it's available online through CanChild, and I think I bought it for $99 Canadian, and I have free access to it for the whole time period. But it's an intervention approach that encourages and empowers children, youth, and adults with disabilities to participate in activities they enjoy by addressing environmental barriers and building capacity through coaching. And the whole idea behind it is it can be used for anyone of any age range. It's not specific to children. The studies done by Mary Law and Anna B. were children with cerebral palsy. But it's one of those neutral tools. It's not just for children with cerebral palsy or just for a certain age. And it's a very nice package. And there are 5 steps to applying the PrEP with children. First, you make goals. You establish and review these goals with the parent and the child if able. A lot of times the children I work with might be a little too young to participate in this fully. I try to encourage them. If they're able to communicate through alternative means, I try to encourage that. Even if they have a yes, no, and I can talk to them, and these are the things that you're mom or dad identified, what do you think? And oftentimes I get a no on some of the things. And then we have to kind of negotiate and resolve. But it's all about identifying occupational performance problems surrounding the child's participation. And according to the PrEP, the ideal tool to use to assess this is the COPM. We use the COPM a lot in our clinic and in our research. And really what you do when you do that with the COPM, you identify goals. Your identified, prioritized problems on the COPM become your goals. And as a therapist, I just really like having those measurable goals. The second step is mapping out a plan and working collaboratively with the parent, and again, the child if possible, and others to determine task components and environmental barriers to facilitation and identified participation goal areas. So when you think about some of the environments that our children are in, it can be kind of hard to maneuver around different places. And does this activity really need to be in this little tiny corner, or could it be moved? Okay. And what I really like about this is the goal of this isn't for the family to come to you every time and say, can you problem solve this out for me? You're helping them build that problem solving on and identification, because it's amazing once you start pointing out to people, well, if you moved your couch 6 inches, you have enough room to come. And it's amazing. They come back and the whole house is rearranged because they have identified different ways. I work with some occupational therapists who are really great at making these types of suggestions. I myself can't like pick curtains for my house. I don't really do well with those types of things, but I can identify little things to help create a different access. Part of the making the plan, you can use the planning forms that the PrEP has, and we've actually adapted some of them for some of the projects that we work on. I just kind of wanted to give you an idea that these are some of the tools that are available in the PrEP. And when I contacted Mary Law about kind of modifying them to meet our needs, she was like, that's absolutely fine as long as you purchased it and you identify that it came as a base from the PrEP. So you're looking at different environmental factors, factors related to the occupation or activity, personal factors, whether it's a support or a barrier. And that was a new way to think for me, because as a PT, I go right to the problem areas. But I didn't necessarily think about, well, gosh, he's got his best friend in the classroom and feels a lot of support from his best friend. So is there a way we can put them together for this activity so he feels supported? And that's something that I learned from the PrEP. And it also encourages me to think very realistically. Can it be modified? Yes, easily. Yes, with difficulty. No. Or maybe it doesn't need to be modified because the social support or whatever specific factor was actually supporting the participation rather than barriers. And then they have a whole bunch of nice examples in the PrEP materials. In this example, and I'm just showing you part of it, the goal for the child was to play baseball, and he wanted to play with families and friends at the community baseball diamond. He wants everyone to use a wheelchair, and he wants to hit from a pitch using a real bat and ball. And they went down through the whole activity here. And I just love this. I would say almost 99.9% of the time when I'm doing research activities, I have students with me that I'm trying to teach about what's in my mind. And this is such a nice way to kind of streamline it all out. And in one of our manual wheelchair skill studies, the students are actually now creating all of these plans. Okay. And then the next step is in the PrEP is to make it happen. We want to initiate the environmental activity. And this is all family and child driven. I might be there to assist if that's what the family or the child wants, but I'm not the key player. The child is the key player, the family is the key player. And I might be there to help with some coaching, and I might break it down. So maybe the family's having trouble at a local park. Maybe, we'll go to the park with no expectations about what we're going to do. We're just going to check it out. We'll go at a time of day where there's not a lot of people around. And then we'll identify some things that are maybe issues, and is there a way we can practice some components of that in an environment that the child feels a little safer in and not as threatened? And that whole idea of the coaching and empowering really comes into play. And when you think about coaching, the end goal of coaching is to get yourself out of a job. And so I want the parents to be doing this. And a lot of my parents catch on really quickly. And I've had a couple of older kids who really catch on to it, and they start coaching their parents, which I just love. Okay. But these coaching sessions are just really important. We want to build the parents' confidence, of course, and the prep really talks about the parents' confidence. But I really want to build the child's confidence as well, and look at, look at this busy environment here in the school. There's a lot we could do to make that a little safer than there. Okay. And yet I don't think anybody would feel like they were not at the same time able to accomplish what's going on. And he's the only child with any sort of disability in his school. So he often feels quite called out, and we'll come back with the case about that. Okay. As a therapist, I also like the fact that step forward, you can measure the process and the outcomes. So you come back with the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure again, but you also really reflect on these outcomes. And with the COPM, because it's a parent or child, you can use it with children 8 or older. I do have, and I think this is coming on a later slide here, but I do have sometimes when the children don't understand that concept of rating their satisfaction with their performance, and that can be a little challenging. And I have parents who are like, but I love my child, I'm not dissatisfied with them. And I'm like, well, you're looking at their performance, not your child. I now have started a script where I talk to people about that in advance, so they never get this negative idea, because it's not satisfaction with their child, it's satisfaction with performance. And one of the things I love about the prep is it really says, it doesn't really matter if you achieve your goal as a therapist. Did the child enjoy it? Did the child have fun? Did the child get to do something, even if it wasn't in a typical way? And when I think about potential issues with the COPM, not only do I find those other 2 factors, I do find that for a lot of my children who are not intellectually functioning at the level of an 8-year-old, it is a pretty difficult measure. So it's hard to get there, aspects of it. We tried goal attainment scaling for a while, but I find goal attainment scaling confusing for me, let alone the children, because you can go either up or down on goal attainment. And that was just really confusing to parents. Well, why would I want to have them go down? Well, you don't, but you have this goal. And so it's just kind of confusing to people. Overall, I really like the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure. For performance, you have a clinical meaningful change when you have an increase of 2 or more points. It's a really nice way to be able to show a lot of nice improvements. And then the last step is moving forward and helping the child to reflect on the activity and performance, and what else do they want to do? What more is there to do? And one of the things is that we include ourselves in there as clinicians when we reflect on that. Is there something better that would help that? Is there something more? And again, I work primarily with students in my research, and it's really important for students to be reflecting on their own activity, because as experienced clinicians, I can guarantee we're all reflecting in the moment, after the time. So on action, in action, for action. But we do it at an unconscious level. The students need the prompts to be able to do that. I think you're making me go backwards, aren't you? Oh, I think that, let's see. Make it happen. Oh, you know what? I think this was supposed to be here. I think I put it 4 instead of a 3, because that's still make it happen, which is 3. And then you have measuring. 4 is measuring the process. I'm sorry, I can't count, obviously. Okay. And again, your problem solving and encouraging people to identify the problems and solve them themselves so that I don't have to jump in there. Okay. Now, you recall that another thing we learned from our study was that children didn't necessarily, especially children who had never stood before on their own, didn't necessarily think, oh, well, I can just reach up for that right now. They needed some coaching with that. And within that, parents were doing some coaching, which is great. But parents often didn't know how to use the power wheelchair standing device as well as the children did. And there were some children who needed some help. But again, just trying to integrate that use into their daily lives. I don't know why this became as a surprise to me. As a person who focuses a lot on power mobility, and I've focused on power mobility throughout my career, you have children all the time that have never moved on their own. They understand that they move the joystick and they move, but they still want their mother to go over and get the chips for them because they don't have that idea that they can go and move to something, and it's a paradigm shift for them, and we can help them make that paradigm shift. You know, you go over and get it. And oh, I can do that. But we needed to have some of that same paradigm shift occur with the power wheelchair standing devices because the families So the family members in the school. I've been into a couple of schools. Not all of our schools are allowing non-district employees in right now, I guess is the best way to talk about it. But when I have, it's amazing how that can be helpful. Promoting new goals. So that idea that there's always something new that you want to do. Your children, they're developing. There are new circumstances, a new environment that they're in. And really, she focused a lot on recommended frequency and duration dosage for supporting standing. I'm not as convinced that we need to focus on just standing for the sake of standing. I'm thinking that we could really get a lot of this incidental standing through function. But that remains to be seen. Hopefully I can get a better grant to work on that one. Analyzing successes, and she talks about analyzing this with the children and the families in ways that empower them. And identifying advocacy needs, again, very similar, some nice associations with the PEP here, and then that ongoing communication that she did amongst therapists, parents, boys, and school caregivers. Well, one of the things I was thinking about though, as I was reading this, these are all boys who had stood before. They knew what it was like to stand. They knew what it was like to, I want to get something on the top shelf. And so I really, again, was stuck thinking about those early learners. And I realized that my assessment of learning power mobility use, or the ELF by Elizabeth Nielsen and Josephine Durkin, which has now evolved into the universal assessment of the learning process, the universal ELF, could really be the answer here. And I use this a lot in my car wheelchair skills training. And I think some of the things I was doing, I was just automatically switching to this without noticing it because it's becoming ingrained into my thought processes and my critical reasoning. I work a lot with Elizabeth Nielsen. We usually meet 1 to 2 hours a week. So I can tell you this is really becoming ingrained in my head. I want to just talk a little bit about the universal ELF. I think probably anyone who's ever heard me talk before has probably heard me talk about the ELF. Everybody okay? So what Elizabeth and Josephine did was they combined their two very large rounded theory studies and came up with the assessment of learning power mobility use, which was an 8-phase process from novice up to expert. And they identified facilitating strategies to help the children to learn, or adults, ageless, so it could be adults too. And I find it the most beneficial for my children who are in those early stages who don't quite know, like, what's this thing in front of me? Why am I here? What's the possibilities here? And it's just a really, I think, wonderful way to approach things. And over the last few years, Elizabeth has come to realize that it doesn't just describe the process of learning to use a power wheelchair. It describes the process of using any tool. And if you think to yourself, you have a new cell phone? Anybody ever have a new cell phone and not know what to do with it? Okay, you're those beginning phases within the universal assessment of the learning process. My husband's stuck in those on his cell phone. And you need assistance to kind of work through. And what are some of the things that you do when you've got a new cell phone? What do you do to help you learn how to use it?
Ask a friend, go on YouTube.
You go on YouTube, you play with it, right? And discover it and learn how to use it. And so these are very universal processes. It's available at no cost on Elizabeth's homepage. I have that up there for you. You can always ask me for the slides after, but this is just the universal instrument. And in here, there's no references to power mobility. Otherwise, it's exactly the same thing. The facilitating strategies are not yet posted on her website for the universal ELF, but if you were to take the facilitating strategies and just take out the words power mobility, you're going to get the general gist. She had hoped to have them done here before the Easter holidays, but she has not, and I'll be reviewing those for for her, and I know she's gonna have Roz Livingstone and Deb Field and a couple other people review them. But I'm very excited about getting this out, because as a physical therapist, how many times, or an occupational therapist, how many times are you trying to help somebody use a new tool? Or relearn how to use a tool. So I'm very excited to get this out. One of the things that we can look at too are the facilitating strategies. Again, I just took power mobility out. I'm going to check my time here. Okay. And Elizabeth and I had recently published an article kind of condensing the facilitating strategies. So it's pretty easy to do that. This is exactly from the article. But I want to call your attention to some things that maybe as therapists we don't always think about as much as we should. Encouraging the patient, the client, or the child in my case, to act in whatever way they want to. If they want to mouse the joystick, if they want to practice getting into a standing position, pressing the button with their elbow, fine with me. It's whatever they want to do. And another thing I don't think we always think about is language. And in these early stages, early phases of this early stage, Elizabeth thinks it's really important to use slow paced language, labeling parts that the person's using, labeling parts of the device, and really being precise and condensed in your verbiage. I don't know about you, I talk too much as a PT, and this has really helped me to be more concise, particularly in these focus times. And my husband's doing better with himself. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. It is all in the open access paper that Elizabeth and I published last year, because I do want to get through to our case a little bit. But again, the encouraging the initiative, the language use are things that maybe we don't always think about on any of the phases. Okay. So what we did was we took all of this information and then put it together in a, we were going to call it a stand up for participation. I might have to think about a new name for it. That it's an intervention we're gonna propose in an upcoming grant. And we have 5 steps, and I've tried to denote where we come up with these things. Okay, so familiarizing the children, parents, and other carers with power wheelchair standing device function and uses from Young's dissertation and from the Universal Health. Allowing them to move through the stages of the learning process and really explore the functions, the sequencing, and the performance with support using the universal facilitating strategies. And then additionally, I really like that idea that Helena Young had of providing the videos. I went to YouTube, maybe Australia has a different YouTube. There weren't a whole lot of power wheelchair. I mean, there were some, but not many with children. So one of the things that I'm working on with some of my current power wheelchair standing device users is making some videos of them doing certain things. Because I really think there's something powerful about a child seeing another child using a power wheelchair standing device. And then I kind of harked back to my old days as a school therapist and how you put a 1-pager and you laminate it and put it on the back of the wheelchair about how to use it. I was like, that would have probably been very helpful. Promoting new goals, again, from Young's dissertation, and identifying, fleshing the occupational performance issues from the PrEP. Again, we're going to use the COPM. Working collaboratively with the parent and the child if they're able to determine the CAS components and environmental barriers. Again, this is from the PrEP. Identifying needs for advocacy for changing in the physical, social, and attitudinal environments. This is something a little new for me, and not something that I've had as much experience in the social and attitudinal, more the physical is where I had a lot of experience. And encouraging problem solving and making that plan again from the PrEP. Okay. One of the things that I realized that perhaps I don't do enough of in my own personal life, celebrating those successes.
let's really help the child see that that success was great. Let's help the parents see, let's help the schools see. And then helping them build their confidence. I love cats, and don't you love the tiger in the function? But also just taking that time to celebrate for a minute. Woohoo, 30-second dance party. And really focusing in on that. One of the things I would really like to look at is confidence in our children who use both manual and power wheelchairs. There is a pediatric version of the WheelCon for manual wheelchair users. We find that the children have a really hard time with that aspect of confidence, but so far there isn't something about the power wheelchairs for children. I would really like to add that someplace along too. And kind of that ongoing collaboration and communication with everybody involved with the child. And I think that for the child that I've been able to go into their school a lot with, we've been able to make some small differences that really have been helpful. In our area, we have a lot of what they call charter schools. You guys have any charter schools? They're public schools, but they kind of private. And they were not under the same restrictions as our local public schools. So they moved on to the charter school. I wanted to just walk you through, again, I have to put on my glasses to check my time here. I want to walk you through a case. We're kind of maybe talk through it a little bit together. This is my friend Josiah, and I talked to Josiah and his mom just the other day to make sure it was okay that I talked about his name, his diagnosis and everything. And Josiah asked if he got paid any money. I said no, but. So he's now 13 years old. He had an incomplete spinal cord injury and he sustained in infancy. He's been using a power wheelchair standing device for almost a year. But he's really nervous about using the power wheelchair standing device around other people. And when he told me that, I'm kind of skipping ahead a little bit, one of the things that the prep would say is I need to kind of get him to say why. And it ends up that one of his teachers, when he first got the power wheelchair standing device, was doing, don't run over me, don't run over me, don't run over me. And she thought he was being funny. And mom said it really upset him. And now he doesn't really want to use it when there's anybody else around. He'll use it at home. He's a little uncomfortable in stores and things like that. But it has really become an anxiety thing for him that he might run over somebody. Okay. So if we were going to look at this, he is a really great user of his power wheelchair standing device. He teaches all my students how to use it. He does a great job. His mom is a pediatric physical therapist. She's doing okay with it. Dad could use a little bit more help. And again, the school has been really unfamiliar with it. His school PT says, I don't know what to do with it. I've never seen one. So one of the first things that we're working on now is just kind of making sure that everybody's familiar. Okay. And promoting new goals. So I asked Josiah what he wanted to do, what he wanted to be able to do because of this. And we've identified a few things that were kind of lower stress than using it in a crowded school or going into a crowded area. We're going to try over the next couple of weeks here to go to a grocery store at an off hour. Because he used to take the power wheelchair standing device to the grocery store when he first got it, but he's developed this fear of running over somebody. He's not taking it to the grocery store, and he won't drive and stand against much. I tried to point out that maybe you can actually see people's feet better if he was in standing. And he said that might be true, but it would be easiest if he just didn't do it at all. And that was kind of a real heart-wrenching moment. You know, a child trying to protect others so much that he's not doing other things. Okay. Working collaboratively with Josiah and his mom to determine all the task components and environmental barriers. Again, we're looking at the prep there. We need to do some social and attitudinal work here. And fortunately, I've got a mom who's really well educated about her rights in the school district and her son's rights in the school district. And she's been really thinking about this a lot, and we've been really working on how it's probably better for her to address those things than for me. I'm not a school district employee. I'm in there as a guest. So it's probably better for her to do that. We've been walking through those types of things. She's also, he has to change schools next year, and she's already thinking about what she wants different and what we're going to prepare him for next year. And then looking at those problem solving strategies, and I tried to even talk to Josiah, well, if you're driving and you're nervous, what could you do? And I could take a couple of deep breaths. I could stop and I could take a couple of deep breaths. I said, well, that's a good strategy. What else could you do? And just try to help him see that it doesn't always have to be in a hurry for these things. We're going to celebrate our success. We're using the COPM. And we're really trying to get everybody involved on this and preparing to get everybody involved on this as we move into the new school. My references. I wanted to end with a really cute picture that I just love when you think about activities and participation. So here's our twins interacting while the one is driving and sitting, and here they are interacting outside of their house with chalk. Mom's at OT. I can't imagine. We had a brick area in the house I grew up in, and if I'd used chalk on it, my mother would have worn my behind. But this mother's OT, so she was fine with it. Okay, so